Prime Minister authorised sanctions on Chinese officials over human rights abuses in Xinjiang and at the same time expressed his keenness to do business. In retaliation, the Chinese slapped sanctions on a number of China-sceptic UK politicians and was reported to be encouraging Chinese customers to boycott Western brands. So is such a relationship feasible? Can we take the cash but keep our moral high ground? Well, here to answer some of those questions, Steve Tsang, Director of the SOAS China Institute, and Sophia Gaston, Director of the British Foreign Policy Group. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Sophia, I'm assuming you're on the line. I didn't hear you just there, but can I start with you and just ask you what you think the implications are of this latest round of sort of tit for tat?
Well, I think China was clearly unsettled by the recent coordination between Western powers to level sanctions towards four Chinese officials for human rights abuses of the Uyghur Muslim community. I think all governments really expected there would be retaliations because China has become rather increasingly aggressive and robust in its responses to these challenges and seems to be really in a sort of state of lashing out at the moment. But I think this show of unity amongst liberal powers who have been, frankly, in a state of disarray, and there hasn't been a huge amount of coordination for some time, particularly over the chaos of the Trump presidency. I think what we're seeing now with the Biden administration, the UK government setting out its integrated review, there's been a bit of a coming together. And I think that is a genuine step change, and it has sent a much more powerful message about what might be a new status quo.
Well, Steve, how do you think China will respond to that powerful message? Are they on the back foot, do you think, or not?
I don't think the Chinese see such a good coordinated attempt by the Western democracies at the moment. Reality is that when the EU announced the sanctions against the same Chinese officials, the Chinese government immediately lay out their counter-sanctions against the EU. It takes them several days afterwards to respond to the UK's sanctions. And I think this is because they did not expect the UK to be involved in any of the sanctions against China at all.
Right.
I think they are not expecting it because of the integrated review, a completely confusing message to them.
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, just to pick up on that point, Steve, with you, is there a sense that the UK doesn't know whether it's coming or going on China, and China could exploit that?
Well, I think the British government thinks that it knows exactly what it wants. It wants to have the cake and eat it. And the Chinese government basically says that you can have the cake or you can eat it, you cannot have both. And we will not allow you to have both. So make up your mind, or we will make up the mind for you.
So, Sophia, what has the UK got to do, and if it can't have its cake and eat it?
Well, look, I mean, we've obviously been going through a process of evolution on our UK-China relations. And I mean, I still think they are going to be in a constant state of evolution. I mean, one of the key hallmarks of the integrated review of the UK's foreign policy, which was published last week, is, there's a lot of flexibility built into the DNA of that document. And I think that is partly strategic and partly pragmatic. There's a lot of dynamism in, the geopolitical environment at the moment. Even our own allies are in a state of dynamism. Just, 6 months ago, we were staring down the barrel of a second Trump presidency and what that would mean for our own role in the world. France and Germany have elections coming up. And as has been noted, I mean, I say there's been a bit of coordination this week on sanctions, but, even within the EU, their own policies of individual member states towards China are still evolving. So I think that we are trying to pursue a balanced approach from a more confident position of having gone through a process of, I suppose, auditing and thinking kind of more expansively about our critical national infrastructure. And I think the idea is that if we can put those safeguards in place, then we can still pursue a kind of relationship of openness. But we also have to accept that, a balanced approach, what we're seeing playing out now, that's exactly the balanced approach in practice. There are going to be many bumps along the road. There'll be all sorts of ebbs and flows in the relationship, and there will be periods of real crisis. the question is how, we are able to kind of move to a process of de-escalation, and also what we do when there are going to be some red lines that are crossed. And I don't think we quite know exactly what those red lines are yet.
Well, let me put that to Steve. How do you think the UK could de-escalate this, or is it inevitably going to escalate and there'll be, crises, as Sophia just said it out there?
I think what we need is a completely thought through and consistent and sustainable China policy. If we do see China as posing a systemic challenge, that will have to be the starting point. Now, it doesn't mean that we do not engage with China and we do not trade with China and cooperate with China economically or on issues like climate change or the pandemic. We should, of course, do that with China, but we should be making it very clear with them that which is the basic starting point and the priorities so that they know where we come from.
But isn't that unrealistic to suggest you can carry on trading to a sort of similar extent to how we do currently if we move to seeing China as a systemic challenge?
Well, it may not be to the same extent as we are carrying on at the moment, but it doesn't mean that we cannot trade with China. China doesn't trade with us because they love us. China trade with us because the trade they conduct with us is beneficial to China.
Yeah. Well, Sophia, don't we need China more than they need us?
Well, I think to some extent, and some of the comments you've seen coming out of the government recently, I think there is a kind of sense as well that if we do integrate ourselves into China's markets and their supply chains, and if we're a valuable marketplace for them, that increases our value to China. And that gives us a kind of point of leverage. I mean, I think at the moment, frankly, if you look at the areas where we're saying that we're still going to pursue some openness, I mean, I think the story on economic and trade and financial investment is a bit ambiguous at the moment. We've got a new national security investment bill, which is meant to put some of these safeguards in place. But in practice, I think there are going to be quite a few bottlenecks and case-by-case decisions. So it's going to be a time-consuming process for us to make sure that we are, making sure that our security is protected all the time. But the big question is where we think we can make a difference on climate change, because I think this is obviously a huge year for Britain. We're hosting the COP26 summit in November. And, I think the idea that we need China at the table on climate change is something where we and the Europeans and the Americans all agree. And we'll be actually taking a leading role in that. So I think there's going to be a lot of attention on this, and it's going to use every skill of our diplomacy to make some serious inroads and secure some genuine commitments from China. But the flip side is, again, they know that this is the one point of openness and engagement where there is a sense that they're really needed. And they're going to use that point of leverage for all they've got.
Steve, what's your answer to that question that I put to Sophia, that we need China more than they need us?
I don't think either country needs the other quite that much. I mean, if we look at the actual trade between the UK and China, we are comparing our trade with China to our trade with Ireland or the Netherlands.
That's lower than I thought.
It's not really quite as much as I think a lot of people assume. Since the time of Queen Victoria, we have always expected the trade with China would be phenomenally important to this country. It has not ever materialized.
So in that case, can't we afford to take a more robust approach? You talked about being clear about China being a systemic challenge. Isn't it therefore all the more surprising that in that integrated, global vision, Global Britain document that Boris Johnson set out, isn't it all the more surprising that Russia was seen as so much more of a threat than China?
I think there is an issue of short-term and longer-term. Russia poses more problems to us in the short term. China's challenge to us is more long-term. So I can understand where the integrated review comes in and why it has that particular balance. But Russia does not pose a systemic challenge to us. and China does, according to the integrated review. And that is something that we have to bear in mind. We also need to bear in mind that China remains a Leninist party state, and they take to heart the teaching of Lenin, one of which is that the capitalists will sell you the rope with which you intend to hang him. They know that. They practice it.
Great note on which